Additionally, there are certain things that at any one moment I am only conscious of. So think about now where you are right now. And, if you were to describe the reality around you, there are certain things that you're going to be conscious of at any one particular point, unless certain things you're going to be unconscious of at any one particular point, unless you actively attempt to experience that. For example, most of us sitting in a room are not conscious of, let's say, the hum of the lights. Right? We don't think of, like, if the air conditioner is running, we're not conscious of the hum of the air conditioner, unless we actually force ourselves to think about it. Right? We stop, we pause, and think, okay, what are the sounds that I'm hearing? What are the things that I'm seeing? Right? We're not conscious of the dust floating around us unless we're actually kind of looking for it, and we don't perceive it unless it hits the light the right kind of way, or I have light outside but not inside. Right? There are certain things that we don't notice unless we actually concentrate. Why? Well, because we'd go crazy if we were able to, if we were consciously aware of those experiences that are taking place, right? The hum is there whether I'm conscious of it or not, and it's going in my ears. But my brain is only processing that in a conscious way or when I actually think about it. And so my body is equipped, my mind is equipped, my brain is equipped to process that information, so that only things that are relevant, that are things that I'm paying attention to, things that are important, are being communicated to me, right? And so by focusing, encouraging you to focus on the screen, right? I'm conscious of the screen, but then I'm not conscious of the other things that may be coming into my eyes, right? The images that are bombarding the rods and cones of my eyes, because I'm focused on what's on the screen before me. And so I'm only conscious of certain things. My brain physically processes that information that's coming from the neurons and the other components of my sensory experiences. Furthermore, it's also important for us to think about how certain lived experiences, certain ways in which I've been socialized, certain ways in which I've been acculturated, affect those perceptions and affect those conscious experiences. So that when I look at that picture of, right, a group of people, I see a box or I see a window. Right? That a lot of that is constructed not because of what I'm seeing, not because of what I'm focusing on, but because of those categories and models that I have learned from my culture. Now, that might be things that I have had to consciously learn, or it could be certain things that I have unconsciously learned in order to get around. So, for example, if I see an infant wearing blue, my immediate assumption is going to be that that infant is a boy. Now, why would that be my assumption? Well, because the socialization in most of our culture historically has been blue is more of an indication of a boy, and pink would be a girl. There's not anything intrinsic in biological sex. There is nothing intrinsic in the color blue that automatically connects with maleness in contrast to femaleness, but it's something that, you know, culture has worked that way. You know, at other times and in other cultures, I would make different assumptions based on different practices and experiences. Excuse me. So that a lot of these things, while unconscious, I don't have to consciously think, okay, well, that child is in blue, so what does that mean about that child's sex? Well, let's see. Okay? But I've been acculturated, I've been socialized to know immediately, without any sort of conscious thought, right? Blue, it's a boy. Pink, it's a girl. Now, certainly today, of course, we're as a culture, we're beginning to play with gender norms and other things, but in general, cultural norms are communicated to individuals in a culture. Cultural behaviors are communicated in such a way that, you know, that people are socialized and they're policed. That if you are working against cultural norms, either intentionally or unintentionally, there are actions that people and cultures engage in to police those kind of behaviors. You know, depending on how much of an infringement against that is. So we're shaped by a variety of things. A lot of that is certainly sense experience, but there's only so many sense experiences we have. There's only certain things we're consciously aware of. And then, of course, we have these cultural things that shape a lot of the way we think of. And so a lot of our knowledge of the world around us is filtered. And it's filtered in a variety of ways. It's filtered physically in that, you know, I'm only able to be in certain places at certain times. I'm only able to physically experience certain things, and I'm only able to be conscious of certain things. And a lot of that is physically shaped. But then there's this other thing, society, culture, whatever we want to call it, that is additional to that. And so we have the physical, we have the cultural. All of these play a work at how we understand the world around us. Now, that's not to suggest that there is no truth. Right? Some people would take this socialization and culturalization and almost a relativism and apply it to truth. Well, you know, and we'll talk about this more in depth, but a proposition like there is a God is true or not independent of my sense experiences, what I'm conscious of, and my cultural shaping. Right? That's independent. There is a physical reality that's independent of what culture has taught me. Right? And this is an important distinction in talking about gender and sex. There's a difference between gender and sex. Gender has to do with how biological sex is performed in society. But, and this is one of the problems we're facing in our culture right now, there's still at the basis a independent physical sex that's independent of gender. And so you know, this is a very important aspect of our culture. There's still, in many respects, a lot of truths that are independent of our experience or our culturalization of those things. So we have objectivity, but we also have subjectivity. And we have to hold these in tension. We can't try to do, you know, we can't try to wholly say the subjectivity of truth, but we cannot ignore that sometimes our subjectivity affects how we perceive truth, right? How we perceive reality. And this is a very important point in thinking about, as we think about, our end goal being that this reflective essay, tying all this together, of how much shaping we have by culture, society, family background, in addition to physical types of realities as well. So perception, a very important part of all this. Let's take that and think then and point to some things related to ethics. And thinking about how we think about the world around us in an ethical framework, or more of a spiritual moral framework, rather than something like I can hear or I don't hear the buzz of the lights, right? Now, we're going to expand on this more by watching the first class from Michael Sandel's Harvard University course on justice. And that's one of the videos you'll be watching this week is thinking about how do we make ethical decisions. But let's kind of use a way to think about that, and we'll kind of introduce that a little bit. Let's talk about the Ice Bucket Challenge. Do you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge? Don't hear about it too much anymore, but in, I think it was 2014, 2015, pretty big deal. Became quite the focus of attention for several months. Do you remember what it was? Probably most of us do, right? The Ice Bucket Challenge, of course, was the challenge to pour a bucket of ice over yourself, with the idea being that you did this because you were challenged to do it, and in the performance of the Ice Bucket Challenge, you were then to challenge someone else. Now, of course, part of the attention to all this had to do with how celebrities and prominent individuals, in this case, this picture is of Facebook creator Mark Zuckerberg, were challenged to do it as well. And so that, of course, garnered more attention because you had famous people doing it, and then you had regular common people doing it as well, and also challenging each other. And it's showing up in social media in a variety of ways. But do you remember why people were doing the Ice Bucket Challenge? Why people were pouring ice and water over their heads? Now, probably a lot of people that began doing it didn't really know why they were doing it. They just knew that other people were doing it, and so they were doing it. Well, of course, the main focus became that this was related to a condition known as ALS. And so the idea was that if you didn't perform the challenge, you were expected to give a donation to the study of ALS, and a lot of people contributed to that. Often it was if you didn't do the Ice Bucket Challenge, you were expected to give more, but there was still kind of the idea that you would also give money, even if you did pour the water over your head. So this was all about ALS. Well, what is ALS? Now, unless you personally suffer from it, or have had a family member or a good friend, or someone that you've known from other type of situation, if you don't have a close connection to somebody who has experienced this, in most cases, you probably don't know what ALS is. ALS stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It is a physical condition, a neurodegenerative disease, sometimes also called Lou Gehrig's disease, because a famous baseball player from the early 20th century named Lou Gehrig suffered from it. And essentially, it's a disease that affects the neurons and the muscles of a person's body, where the brain can't control muscle movements, so the muscles begin to atrophy because they're not being used. Ultimately, it leads to paralysis and then eventually death because people are not able to really do much as their body essentially stops working the way it's supposed to. There is no cure for ALS currently. There are some drugs that evidently slow it down, slow down the progression, but right now there currently isn't a cure for ALS. So, people are engaging in the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS, most of whom probably did not know, although probably a lot of people might have known somebody with ALS and did it because of that, or encouraged people to do it because of that. So that's what that was about. Well, let's ask a different question. Was the Ice Bucket Challenge good?